By the spring of 1945, the Third Reich was on the verge of collapse. Germany had been at war for nearly 6 years, and the relentless Allied bombing campaign had reduced its cities to rubble. The once mighty Wehrmacht was a shadow of its former self, depleted by years of fighting and crippling manpower shortages. The mood among the German population was one of despair and resignation. The early confidence in a swift victory had long evaporated, replaced by a sense of dread and uncertainty. Rumors of approaching Soviet armies spread like wildfire, fueling panic and fear among civilians. Refugees from the east, displaced by the advancing Red Army, poured into the remaining German-held territories, carrying with them harrowing tales of Soviet brutality and retribution. The Nazi leadership, however, remained defiant, urging the populace to fight to the bitter end and promising a miraculous turnaround that never materialized. As Allied forces closed in from both east and west, the Battle of Berlin became the final desperate struggle of the war in Europe. Soviet troops, fueled by a thirst for revenge and eager to plant the red flag in the heart of the Nazi regime, launched a massive offensive on the German capital. The fighting in Berlin was apocalyptic, a brutal and chaotic struggle for every street, every building. The once grand boulevards of the German capital were transformed into a hellscape of rubble, smoke, and the stench of death. Amidst the relentless shelling and street fighting, ordinary Berliners, men, women, and children, were caught in the crossfire, their lives shattered by the violence engulfing their city. Despite the overwhelming odds, elements of the German army, along with fanatical SS units and hastily assembled Volkssturm militias, fought with the ferocity of cornered animals. Their resistance, though ultimately futile, only prolonged the agony of the city and its inhabitants. By the end of April, with Soviet forces tightening their grip on the city center, the fall of Berlin was imminent. Deep beneath the ruins of the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler, the architect of this devastating war, retreated to his underground bunker. Isolated from the carnage unfolding above, Hitler clung to the delusional belief that Germany could still snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Surrounded by a dwindling circle of loyalists, including Joseph Goebbels, his Minister of Propaganda, and Martin Bormann, his private secretary, Hitler received increasingly desperate reports from the front lines. The reality of Germany's impending defeat, however, seemed to elude him, or perhaps he simply refused to acknowledge it. In the confines of the bunker, the atmosphere was a toxic mix of fanaticism, fear, and despair. As the days turned into nights, Hitler's behavior became increasingly erratic. He lashed out at his generals, blaming them for the Reich's misfortunes, while clinging to fantasies of miracle weapons and last-minute counter-offensives. As the Red Army tightened its grip on Berlin, a desperate race against time ensued. Millions of German civilians, trapped in the path of the advancing Soviet forces, fled westward, hoping to escape the wrath of the Red Army. Their flight was a harrowing ordeal, marked by chaos, fear, and unimaginable hardship. Columns of refugees stretching for miles clogged the roads, their progress slowed by bombed-out bridges, strafing Allied aircraft, and the sheer volume of humanity on the move. Food and water were scarce, and shelter from the elements even more so. Disease was rampant, and death, particularly among the very young and the elderly, was a constant companion. Adding to the terror were the widespread reports of Soviet atrocities committed against German civilians. Stories that, while often exaggerated in the fog of war, fueled the panic and desperation of the fleeing population. The race for the West became a fight for survival, a desperate attempt to escape the clutches of one enemy only to face an uncertain fate at the hands of another. Section 5. Unconditional surrender, the instruments of peace. With the fall of Berlin imminent and Hitler's grip on power broken, the process of negotiating Germany's surrender began. General Alfred Jodl, representing the German High Command, was authorized by Karl Dönitz, Hitler's successor, to seek terms from the Allied powers. The Allied leadership, however, was adamant. Germany would surrender unconditionally. There would be no negotiated peace, no compromise that might allow the remnants of the Nazi regime to survive, or for Germany to claim, as it had after World War I, that it had been stabbed in the back. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe, insisted on a complete and unequivocal surrender, a demand that was non-negotiable. The Germans, facing the prospect of utter annihilation, had little choice but to comply. Section 6. The key players, architects of the German surrender. The signing of the German surrender documents marked the culmination of years of brutal warfare and ushered in a new chapter in European history. The key figures who gathered to formalize Germany's defeat represented the Allied powers that had fought so valiantly to vanquish the Nazi regime. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe, played a pivotal role in orchestrating the final Allied offensives and in shaping the terms of Germany's surrender. His unwavering leadership and strategic acumen earned him the respect of both his Allied colleagues and his defeated German adversaries. Representing the Soviet Union, which had borne the brunt of Germany's aggression and suffered unimaginable losses, was Marshal Georgy Zhukov, a brilliant military strategist who had played a key role in breaking the back of the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front. His presence at the surrender ceremony served as a stark reminder of the Soviet Union's immense contribution to the Allied victory. Section 7. VE Day Victory in Europe. News of Germany's surrender sparked scenes of jubilation and relief in Allied nations around the world. In London, crowds thronged Trafalgar Square and Buckingham Palace, waving flags, cheering and embracing complete strangers. The outpouring of emotion was raw and unrestrained, a collective release of years of pent-up anxiety, grief and sacrifice. For the first time in nearly 6 years, the people of Britain, along with their allies, could finally dare to dream of a future free from the threat of Nazi tyranny. In the United States, the news of Germany's surrender, coming just weeks after the death of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, triggered similar celebrations. From Times Square in New York City to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, Americans poured into the streets, their faces a mixture of joy, relief, and disbelief. Section 8. A continent divided, the immediate aftermath in Europe. The end of World War II brought an end to the bloodshed and tyranny that had gripped Europe for nearly 6 years, but it also marked the beginning of a new era of geopolitical tension and uncertainty. Europe lay in ruins, its cities shattered, its economies devastated, and its people physically and emotionally exhausted. The wartime alliance between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union, forged in the crucible of a common enemy, began to unravel almost as soon as victory was declared. The ideological divide between the capitalist West and the communist East, papered over during the war, now re-emerged with a vengeance. As Soviet troops consolidated their control over Eastern Europe, a region they had liberated from Nazi rule but were now reluctant to relinquish, the seeds of suspicion and mistrust between the former allies took root. The Iron Curtain, as Winston Churchill famously described it, descended across Europe, dividing the continent into two armed camps. Section 9. The Dawn of the Atomic Age, a New World Order. The surrender of Germany marked the end of World War II and the dawn of the Atomic Age. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki cast a long shadow over the Allied victory. These bombings ushered in a terrifying new era of potential mass destruction. Atomic weapons fundamentally altered the balance of power on the world stage. Section 10. Legacies of War, the Enduring Impact of World War II. The surrender of Germany in 1945 brought to a close the most destructive conflict in human history. World War II, a global cataclysm that claimed the lives of an estimated 60 to 80 million people, left an enduring legacy on the world, shaping the geopolitical landscape, transforming social norms, and leaving an indelible mark on the human psyche. The war's end ushered in an era of unprecedented international cooperation, embodied in the establishment of the United Nations. The UN, founded on the ashes of the League of Nations, was tasked with maintaining international peace and security, promoting social progress, and upholding human rights. The horrors of World War II, particularly the Holocaust, which exposed the depths of human depravity, also led to a renewed focus on human rights and the development of international legal frameworks aimed at preventing future atrocities. Reflections on Victory, a moment frozen in time. The surrender of Germany in May 1945 stands as a pivotal moment in history, a moment when the tide of tyranny receded and freedom prevailed. It is a moment forever etched in memory, resonating with profound significance even decades later. As we reflect on World War II, we are reminded of the fragility of peace and the enduring costs of conflict. The images of victory serve as a poignant reminder of both triumph and toll. The greatest generation left an indelible mark on the world. Their courage and resilience continue to inspire today.